Hi, Max.
Well, hi, Nadine. Nice to be with you.
We're so excited to be giving you one of our creativity awards this year.
Well, I'm delighted. I'm honored to be receiving this award, particularly in the creative category, because that's what I've always tried to accomplish in both my personal and my professional life.
And creativity is one of the most important things we need in this world. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we're both from New Jersey. I grew up in and around Asbury Park, and you grew up outside Newark. Maybe you were born in Newark and grew up outside. You grew up outside of Newark. And I wanted to start by telling us a little bit about your Jewish upbringing.
Well, I'm not born in Asbury Park. I certainly spent a lot of years in Asbury Park, as many of your viewers and people gathered tonight might remember. I was born in Newark and lived in Newark in the South Ward. The South Ward is the area virtually behind the big Budweiser plant. When you're landing at Newark Airport, you can see that. The South Ward is known as Philip Roth territory, and that's where we lived when I was first born. And of course, after that, we moved to a little house in Maplewood, New Jersey. My mother was a long time, more than 40 years, phys ed teacher at Weequahic High School, which also was made famous by Philip Roth. So it was a very tight-knit community. It was a very observant community. Philip Roth was actually wrote a book called Nemesis, which he details the polio experiences of the late 40s and early 50s. And there's a summer camp he goes to. It was actually my father and mother's summer camp up in the Pocono Mountains. So that sort of heightened Jewish cultural and artistic experience was very present in my life as a young person. The synagogue to which we belonged was founded in part by my grandfather, whom I'm named after. His name was Max Minland, and a family that emigrated from an area now that is Belarus. And they first organized the temple in Newark, New Jersey on High Street, and then later bought some property in East Orange, New Jersey, which is where I sort of grew up in the temple from literally the day I was born.
So Judaism was very important to your family, and you had what was it like? Yeah.
Yes, it was. From Friday night services at camp during the summer. I still have the handmade pine bima that the carpentry shop at the camp made. I can vividly remember going around my neighborhood with the little blue can to collect money for treason Israel as a child.
Yes, I remember that.
So yes, the experience of growing up in New Jersey as a Jew was something that was very formative for me. The temple was particularly inspiring, largely because of the rabbi who served at the time that I was growing up, whose name was Avraham Soltis. He was Central Casting's version of a rabbi, a religious man. He was extremely good looking, silver hair. Some of your very much older viewers and participants tonight might remember a show on Sunday mornings from the 1950s called Lamp Unto My Feet. He was the host of that show, and later on had something of a movie career as the rabbi in Goodbye Columbus and The Goodbye Girl. And Rabbi Soltis was a close family friend with my parents, an extended family. And he came at the rabbinate as almost, it was an artist, very poetic, very musical, which appealed to me. And in those days, again, some of your older participants might remember the the way they participated in services in the 50s, it was what used to be called high church. It was very formal. It was not casual. For example, there were no acoustic guitars. There was a huge pipe organ buried up in the rafters somewhere. I never, to this day, know where that pipe organ was located, but we had a 16-voice choir located up above the bema behind curtains. And, you know, as a young child, it was very impressive because you would hear these incredible voices come from you did not know where, you know, but you had to look up. They were coming from somewhere above us. So maybe that was heaven. So for me, it was the pageantry of the high church. And of course, I went to, you know, 3 times a week to Hebrew school. Once I got in 3rd grade, was bar mitzvahed there, was confirmed there. So my background culturally, religiously, artistically was quite informed by that experience, that communal experience. I met the first guitar player I ever played with at our rabbi's son's birthday and bar mitzvah, same day in February of 1964. Coincidentally, his bar mitzvah was almost 6 days precisely after the Beatles debuted on the Ed Sullivan Show. So I didn't know any guitar players, and a friend of his who lived near him brought his electric guitar, and it was like the heavens opened. He played this song on he was a year older than me, and he played this song on electric guitar. This was a week after the Beatles debuted. So when my bar mitzvah rolled around on April 11th, 1964, he and I, his name was Jeff Kowalik, still is, we formed a little band, and my first musical experiences were playing in our temple and the other temples in Essex County, New Jersey, and at the Jewish Y in Newark, which was always good for a half a dozen, you know, teen dances as I went through junior high and high school, which was located on Chancellor Avenue, again, right directly in the center of Philip Roth territory. I think one other thing that was important to my upbringing was that because I have 2 older sisters, one no longer with us, who were born in the 40s, and they were very much 40s children, and living in Newark, everything was done in Newark, the city of Newark. So when I was born, until I was about, I guess, 14 or so, all the shopping, all the cultural things we did took place in Newark. And that was our city, so to speak. And it was tremendously vibrant, and that still is, of course. It went through some tough times like many cities, but in those days, there were no malls, there were no suburban malls. So my experience was really as a city kid, but not living quite in the city. After I was, you know, 6 months old or so, we moved. But yeah, the sort of living in that Philip, it was so like when I read Philip Roth's work, I feel like he's telling my story in many ways.
Well, what was your bar mitzvah like?
My bar mitzvah was great. I used it as an opportunity to have my band play at my bar mitzvah. There's pictures of me on the drums in a beautiful black mohair suit, which I remember my parents sort of struggled to buy, and it was $32. I still have the tie, and I've actually worn the tie both on late night television and during some concerts with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. It was my first grown-up tie. And I'm quite the nostalgia buff, and you know, I'm always known as the pack rat of the E Street Band because I have virtually everything I've ever owned in my life in several warehouses, fairly organized, much of the stuff digitized. So they're touchstones for me. My bar mitzvah was, I did fairly well. You know, I had already been performing as a drummer, so I understood the idea of quote unquote show, you know. So I took the Haftorah and Torah passages seriously, and my voice, fortunately, had changed a couple of months before my bar mitzvah, so it didn't crack like that, and that was a bit of an advantage. But at the reception, which was held in the lower level of the temple, you might say the basement, but it had a stage. And I did many shows there as a kid. It's where we had our Passover Seder with the rabbi. There's pictures of me playing with all of my friends standing around me, and my friend Jeff playing the guitar. And we had a local bar mitzvah wedding band, actually a pretty famous guy for the area, Herbie Zane, who gave me my first jobs as a young novelty drummer back in the late 50s, 58, 59. So our social life really did, as a family, center around the temple, both in going to services. My mother is president of Sisterhood for many years, and all of her friends belonged, you know, they were the president of the temple, Julius Philo. So those were the adults that I knew as a child.
Well, how is Judaism connected to your music? Or is it?
Well, I think all music is connected to the concept that I grew up with, and many of you will know, of course, is Tikkun Olam, a pathway, lighting the world, making the world better. Certainly in my later years, when at the age of 23, I hooked up with Bruce and the E Street Band. Bruce's music is certainly a beacon for freedom, for you know, participation by everyone. So the idea that you can change the world through music, I have seen up close. I've seen how that is absolutely true. If from the drums, if for no other reason than just getting people up out of their seats to dance. And one thing I learned, you know, when you're involved in a religious service, in a synagogue, in a church, in a cathedral, in a cave, anywhere, in a rock and roll concert, which is a religious experience for people, you're transformed, you know, at the best of times. From the drums, if I'm able to get people out of their seat and dancing, that's a mitzvah. And I'll tell you why. Because when you're dancing, you're able to leave the world, the sort of mortal world, the practical world, whatever may be bothering you, and you're connected to something visceral, physical. And I felt that, and I didn't know it at the time, upon reflection, I'll be 72 soon, upon reflection, it was my own way of contributing to Tikkun Olam and exhibiting a life lived that way. It was, I got extreme pleasure from watching people enjoy themselves. And I know that I was part, whatever level that I was performing in, I was part of that joy. That's why they call it playing.
It's so true. So true. We all need to dance way more, much more, especially now. So did you always know you wanted to be a musician? And when did you first know you were a drummer?
Well, my mother, of course, probably apocryphally said that I was beating out rhythms before I was born. You know, you made a distinction of being a musician. Being a musician, it came much later. Actually, being a drummer was something I wanted to do literally from the first time I saw Elvis Presley, like a lot of people, but not on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was on the Dorsey Brothers summer replacement show during the summer of 1955. This was about a year, almost a year, actually just a year before Elvis debuted on the Ed Sullivan Show. My sisters at that point were teenagers, so they knew all about Elvis Presley. I didn't know anything about Elvis Presley other than my sisters were out of their minds waiting in anticipation for Elvis to come on this show. Now, on that show, it was a locked off camera angle. So you saw his guitar player, his upright bass player, and his drummer. His drummer was DJ Fontana. And DJ Fontana became a deep, longtime friend of mine who was my first drum hero. He was Elvis's original drummer, played with him literally from 1954 through the time he was in the Army when he got back, and he played on the soundtracks. And he recently passed away 2 years ago. And he was my first inspiration because they played the song Hound Dog, and there's a break in there where the drums go da 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 da. And that for me was a call to arms, that martial drum beat. And because all the attention, even Elvis's attention, went to that beat. So I found my niche early on as an accompanist, because the guys up front, the show-offs, the singers, the guitar players, the sax players or trumpeters in those days, they needed good support. And many of the great drummers in American music history have been of Jewish descent, Jewish origins. Buddy Rich, Mel Lewis. You know, it has something to do with taking responsibility. As a drummer, you're the last line of defense. You know, if you drop a beat, it stops. So there's a certain level of, you know, I was raised in a household where I was given great responsibility if I exhibited responsible behavior, so that it went hand in hand. So I was given a lot of freedom. I was also very fortunate as a drummer to be encouraged by my parents when it wasn't very popular, because starting in the late 50s throughout the mid 60s, my parents suffered tremendous financial setbacks, and basically all of us had to go out and work. So where my generation of teenagers, and I've talked to Bruce Springsteen and Steve Van Zandt particularly about this all the time, my experience was completely different than theirs. I got nothing but support because I could go out and I could make $1 here or there, and as a drummer. And you know, they used to call pushcart salesmen, which was what my grandfather Max was on the Lower East Side when he came to New York from Belarus in the late 1880s. They used to call them drummers. So in a sense, I'm just carrying on the family tradition.
Well, did your parents want you to become a drummer? Were you planning on being a drummer originally?
Well, yeah, actually, I wanted to play the drums from the age of 5 once I saw DJ Fontana.
But as a profession?
Well, I never really thought of it as a profession because I didn't think of anything as a profession. I was just a kid having fun and transmitting my fun to other people. So that was what kind of drew me in. Also, I was very shy. I was, you know, bespeckled. Also, I had a very, very unusual name for a child born in 1951. In fact, I dare say throughout my life, I've never met another Max who was my age. I was named after my grandfather, who died shortly before I was born, as I said. And so Max Weinberg, that set me apart. And the fact that from the first time I sat down at the drums, I had rhythm, I could play. I took drum lessons, I studied. You know, my mother and father's whole thing was, if you're going to do anything, you must do it professionally. You show up on time, you look sharp, and you do it to the best of your ability every time you do it. They would accept no less. So to their credit, being, you know, the first generation, although on my father's side, I would believe I was 5th or 6th generation. His ancestors came from, they came from what became Poland. It was at the time Russia, in the great Jewish migration across the seas in the 1840s to Philadelphia. His grandfather was born in Philadelphia. So on my father's side, there's quite a long history. On my mother, first generation, I'm second generation, but you know, she and her 4 older sisters, the oldest of whom was born just before the turn of the 20th century, We're all college educated, quite unusual for women of that age to go to college. In fact, my eldest aunt, Sadie, was the first woman Phi Beta Kappa in the United States, graduated sometime around 1916 from what was then Carlisle College, Jim Thorpe territory, and became Dickinson College in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of great stories, but they of my family that I've loved. I've just really reveled in them. And being the second youngest of all these first cousins, I was able to get. I didn't know my grandfather. They did. He was quite the charismatic individual, and having, my mother and four of her sisters, older sisters, who I was with almost every day. I had 5 Jewish mothers who were all different and all thought that art, culture, music were the most important things. Integrity, again, being professional. So these were the sort of concepts that I grew up with. I don't think that obviously they're limited to our religion, but it was something that they felt very strongly about. And so you naturally inherit those sort of teachings. And I saw a way to apply it to what I was doing in front of the public. You didn't necessarily learn it in public school. I certainly learned it in Hebrew school and in Temple. And while I don't read Hebrew, I can kind of read Hebrew, but the one phrase that I remember hearing all the time as a kid in Hebrew school was "Sheket bavakasha."
Stop.
Yes. Means be quiet and sit down. I was a nervous kid, and my mother, who was very tied into child psychology, discovered, knew that and channeled it into the drums. So it was not only, I'd certainly be diagnosed with some sort of attention deficit order today, but my mother was hip enough to recognize that and channeled it into physical activity. And, as I said, when I was 6, 7 years old, it was channeled into playing drums as a novelty act. So this Herb Zane, who I mentioned, would hire me and pay me 50 cents to come up and do a rendition of When the Saints Go Marching In. So I kind of associated from a very early age. I play drums, I play well, people laugh, they smile, they dance, and I get paid for it. I would have done it for nothing, but you get paid for it. And it's the one profession where you refer to it as playing. You're not working, you're playing. There's a great expression as I've gone through the music business at all levels that musicians use, that you really get paid for the 22 hours a day that you're not playing, and you do the show for free.
That's a great idea. It's a great expression. Well, it sounds like you had a very fortunate upbringing, really, in all ways. But what was your big break in becoming a drummer? I mean, it's one thing to be playing in the basement of the synagogue. What happens? What happened? How did you get known?
I think my big break as a drummer came in the second month of 7th grade in 1963, where truly over that summer, the song Wipeout was a drum solo, and it hit the charts. And there was a talent show. And I went up and by myself played Wipeout, which nobody could play. And I could play it. And I had, by that point, a little drum set and a band. We didn't have guitars at that point, but, we had trumpet, stand-up bass, and piano. And we played Wipeout. And suddenly, the ovation I got was among the greatest ovations of my life. And I've played to some big audiences on big stages, including the Super Bowl in 2009. But that first time where I did that, in the first couple of weeks of a new school, and again, I was tall for my age, bespectacled, had braces, and an unusual name. I wasn't Timmy, Stevie, Dougie, Billy. I was Max. And my mother used to correct people all the time because her father's name was Max, and people would call me Maxie or Maximilian, Maxim. And she would always correct them, although my friends in the and colleagues in the E Street Band call me Maxie, Maxilla. My mother would always say, it's just Max. And of course, I have my Bruce Springsteen given nickname, Mighty Max, because that was the sort of influence of my mother, who was a gym teacher, who was incredible. Both my parents were incredible athletes. And because of that, they didn't really let me play sports because they want me to get hurt. And at the time I was upset, but now 60 years later, I'm very glad they made that decision because I'm in good shape. I can play the drums for 4 hours. But my big break, as I said, that first experience. And out of that first experience, my band was hired to play later that year. This is before the Beatles, for the 7th grade dance. And we played for the 7th grade dance in the gym, and the kids went berserk. We were called the Epsilons. It was Epsilonomania before Beatlemania. And this was in November of 1963. And I had people, they weren't running after us, but they were certainly clamoring after the 4 of us in this band. And when you have a taste of that, you want more. So I was very directed, and nothing for the next 15 or 16 years really distracted me from gaining some position as a professional in the music business. And then I met Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band over the summer of 1974.
Yeah, tell us, how did you meet Bruce? What happened?
Well, I continued playing. I went to college. I did all the normal things. I was a good student. I continued playing in bands all through consistently. And Bruce put an ad in the Village Voice, which at the time, I guess it's still around, but it was the social, very progressive village newspaper in New York City. And they had a tremendous section in the back called Public Notice Music, where they had ads. And I came across this ad that a friend had seen and gave me. We were playing in a band together. I was playing on the Broadway show Godspell, and I'd been doing that for about a year. I was going to Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey, studying business. And he gave me this ad. I went down, I auditioned. I was something like the 60th drummer or thereabouts to audition. And Bruce is a very good judge of character, and he saw something in me. I might not have been, there were some good drummers, well-known drummers, who became well-known drummers who auditioned, but he saw something in me and he asked me to join his fledgling band. I took a huge pay cut to join the E Street Band because I was playing on Broadway and it was Broadway scale. I was living at home with my parents, and I owned a little car. So I was living the life, going to school, playing the show at night. And after we played the first night, before I got the job, I said, I didn't know this, everybody got a half hour to play. We played for 3 hours. Now, I did not know that was the norm. I found out later the next week when I got in the E Street Band for $50 a week. But I went over to him the first night and I said, gee, I don't know you. I don't really know your music, but I'll tell you what, I'll play with you for nothing. It was an unbelievable, the greatest musical experience I ever had. And it wasn't just his dynamism and charisma and obvious leadership, but it was also where the other 3 guys, Clarence Clemens, Gary Talent, and the Dan Federici. Clarence and Danny are no longer with us. We think about them every day. It was the way they related to Bruce. I had never been in a band where other people paid so much attention to the center of the action. And that's what they did. And that impressed me. And I'd been playing long enough and in bands that were democratic bands and everybody, was at each other's throats and still making music, that I realized, wow, this is something really special. So I said, I'll play with you for nothing. And I remember I did a paper in high school in a music class on Duke Ellington, and I came across a quote of Duke Ellington's that really stuck with me. And he said this sometime in the 30s or 40s. And Duke Ellington said, if I remember correctly, a musical profit far outweighs a financial loss. And particularly in the years where I was getting a lot of musical profit, but not making a lot of money, that sustained me. And that was what came to mind when I first met Bruce Springsteen was, whatever happens here, you know, and we were still playing fraternity houses and small clubs. He had two records out that had really kind of not sold very well. And he was about to be dropped by his label. And so we were on the road constantly, and it was a ball. I was having the time of my life. And, you know, I was 23 years old. I'll be 72. We're still playing. We're still having fun. And we're only about 2 months away from starting a world tour. So it's been a marvelous experience, the high point of which was meeting my wife, Rebecca, in the late 70s, and having our two lovely children, Allie and Jay, and welcoming their spouses, Josh and Chloe, into our family. So I've had so much nachas through my life. I have to pinch myself.
Well, after all these years of performing with the E Street Band, is there one song that you play all the time that you love more than that you just love? It just makes your heart sing when you play.
Well, I've been asked that question, and you know, I take each song, and there's a book of about 800 songs in our band. I take each song individually as I'm performing it, one at a time, and do my best on each one. But what comes to mind is the simplest of songs drumistically to play for me is a song called Ramrod. It's on the River album from 1980. And it's simple, but it's not easy. And as I've gotten older, I've found that the simpler things are often the hardest things to pull off. And the reason I love playing that song is because it has this just primitive beat. But as Bruce refers to me as the king of the big beat, it's a big beat. It's simple, but again, it's not easy to play. And if my mandate to myself is I play that beat and I'm going to get everybody out of their seats. And it's one part of the show where I can actually look around and take my eyes off of Bruce for a split second and play this beat and see people just exhilarated by this song. So it's a physical thing, you know. It's not intellectual. We could spend the next 5 hours. I could go down each song and tell you what they mean to me spiritually, intellectually, culturally. But in terms of just pure animalistic, I'm communicating with you on a basic primeval level, Ramrod would be the song. Okay.
So you're a man of many interests and talents, and I'm wondering, if you weren't a drummer, what would you be?
Well, my avocation is real estate development, but that grew out of my love of architecture. When I was 16, I took an IQ test. I suppose my mother was a little bit worried about me at Stevens Institute of Technology, and which coincidentally, my son graduated from with a business engineering degree. With
your son, the drummer.
My son, the very famous, successful drummer in the band Slipknot, who graduated with honors, something I did graduate. I dropped out of Seton Hall to join the E Street Band. 15 years later, I went back to get my degree. I had 21 credits to go. And with the help of Becky, my wife, I was able to finish, strictly for the reason that I wanted to be able to tell my then unborn children, not even conceived, that I got a college degree. Education was always in my entire family. The entire extended family was quite important. It was paramount above everything, education. And as immigrant Jews, that was what they didn't have any resources, but that was, the patriarch of my family. His name was Joshua, and he was a Talmudic scholar, never worked other than at studying the Talmud in Russia at the time. He did not want to come to America because it was too secular. When he got very old, he did come just after my mother was born in 1915. 6 months later, as the story goes, Joshua Minlin did not like it. And he said, I'm going to Palestine. And he did. He went to Palestine and he passed away in Palestine. He's buried in the Mount of Olives. And there's a picture of him with his waist-long beard, his robes, his tali, his skull cap, and his prayer book. The one picture that he took, which I have. And so that thread runs through my entire family. But if I had to choose, I enjoy, recently I served as a 2-year member of my town's planning and zoning board, because everyone in my family pretty much has a law degree, even if they didn't practice law. And my father and my uncles, they all sort of said, it's a good training ground. It trains you how to think. So I had an interest in law from an early age. And my father's perspective on the law was law as justice. And it was really descended from, he came from quite the religious family, the Talmudic law, and meting out justice, good, bad, for depending on the receiving end. So it wasn't about doing well, it was about doing good and facilitating good. So I had an interest in that in terms of the intellectual aspect of it. I did go to law school briefly, Cardozo, in New York City for several weeks after the East Street Band, a year after the East Street Band broke up and I graduated college. I did, and I actually learned in those several weeks things that have become very important to me from a legal viewpoint. But if I had to do it over again, I would have been an architect. I love architecture, love architects generally. As Frank Lloyd Wright, one of my heroes, intoned early in the 20th century, architecture is frozen music. Mm-hmm. And I subscribe to that. So if you look at my library, there's all sorts of books, but there is a major section on everything from Palladio to Vitruvius to Frank Lloyd Wright to all the contemporary architects, all the Pritzker winners. I just love reading about it, the built world and how the built world shapes our society. So if I came back in another life, I think I would open an office and I'd become a member of the AIA.
That's fascinating. Is there one thing that you've done or one thing about you that you want your kids and your future grandkids to know about you?
Well, I'm fortunate in that perhaps 5 or 6 days after this airs, and again, I'm delighted to be mentioned in the same company as the people you're tributing. My daughter Allie will have given birth to a girl whose name we don't know. Allie and her husband Josh Rogan, who are journalists and broadcasters in Washington, D.C. The same lessons I learned. Show up, do your best every time you show up. And in the East Street Band, we've taken that ethos further, that several things. When we play a show, our mandate coming from Bruce is we give people more than their money's worth. We leave it on the stage. There's nothing left. And if you can do that, it sort of harkens back to that idea of being a professional, and we take it very seriously. And if I could pass this along to future generations of my children, grandchildren, and their grandchildren, is that do whatever you do with integrity, professionalism, and the idea that you're giving back. And you can be very well compensated for whatever you do. But if, of course, and it's almost a cliche now, but if you love what you do, I mean, there's certainly aspects about for example, the music business that I don't enjoy that are necessary to facilitate. But when I get up on those drums, I'm a 13-year-old kid again, every time. And that's been the constant in my life. So at the end of the day, again, it's somewhat of a cliche, but do what you love to do, because you're going to be doing it a long, long time. And, you know, my mother had a saying. My mother lived to the age of almost just before her 98th birthday, and completely sound of mind. Her body just grew too old for her mind, but she had lots of sayings and mottos. And one of them was that children bring their own luck. And I love that phrase. And so as I speak to you, Nadine, I'm looking with bated breath, really, for the birth of my first grandchild, and to be called, we don't know yet, but maybe Grand Dude. But honesty,
Grandudess, it's a girl.
Honesty, integrity, dignity, and giving people in whatever you do more than their money's worth. If you aspire to those ideals, I think that puts you ahead of the game. And of course, if you're a drummer, keeping a solid beat.
Great. Well, I have two questions about music. And one is that, do you have a favorite piece of Jewish music? And it could be any genre, like a piece of music that you think people should know about that not enough people know about, that really brings something to the world.
A piece of Jewish music that brings something to the world.
Yeah, any genre. It could be
Sure.
a prayer, could be a beat, could be a rhythm, it could be a...
Yes, well, there's the great Jewish composers from early Berlin to George Gershwin. When you listen to their music, it is all Eastern European. It's all derived from psalms and hymns, and it's instantly recognizable. If you get into it technically on a thematic, rather a theory level, there are modes of music. So, quote unquote, Jewish music has quite distinctive progressions and melodies. Certainly, for me, I loved, and it's changed quite a bit, but there are so many. So you can look at the great American composers for Jewish inspired music. There was a singing duo in the 50s, I guess they were, named the Barry Sisters. And they had a song called Sena Tsena, which as a child, I listened to that all the time because it was very upbeat, had a great rhythm. I recently recorded, not so recently, maybe 8 years ago, a song called Mazel. Mazel means good luck, right? And it's a Yiddish song from the Yiddish theater back in the 20s. So liturgically, when I listen to the prayers that you, if you're in temple on a Friday night or Saturday morning, and I always found very moving, particularly when I heard Rabbi Soltis intone it, the Mourner's Kaddish, because there is a melody that goes with that. And usually in Reform temples, the melody isn't used. But our cantor, who was an opera singer back in the 50s and 60s, I remember his name, Herman Dansker, baritone, double baritone, and he would intone the Mourner's Kaddish where there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And, you've heard it so many times, you've spoken along with it, you've intoned it with your fellow congregants, but when you read the translation of it, it is mourning, but it's so hopeful. And I can remember one other thing that, not specifically music, but at the end of each service, Rabbi Soltis, I get chills thinking of it, but in his robes and his head covering that was very, very high church attire, similar to what Greek Orthodox holy people would wear. He he would, before he put the Torah back in the ark, he would turn around and he'd hold it up and he'd open it up. And he would say the words, behold, this is my covenant. And you didn't see his lips move because his back was to the congregation. And I'm actually getting a little weepy thinking about it, but he did it with such elan that as a child, you felt it was coming right from Adonai. Of course, I didn't, obviously it was just an impressive presentation, but it is a tree of life to those who hold fast to it. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. And that was then, it was Good Shabbat. And that has stuck with me as a wonderful passage for all of us on earth to aspire to. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. So if you can't find music in that phrase, well, come to a Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band concert, and we'll try to educate you.
Thank you. I know we need to wrap up, but I have one more question for you. And I just think it's an important question because we live in such a divided nation at this time, so polarized. And I'm just wondering, is there one piece of music that you think we should all be listening to together? One piece that can remind us about our common roots? One piece that might bring our nation back together?
Great question. And I would have to reference This Land Is Your Land. But the original version by Woody Guthrie, as sung and as explained by Bruce Springsteen himself, where if you read all the lyrics, it is the perfect poem and paean to unity. This land is your land. This land was made for you and me. And I can't think of any better song that illustrates the aspirations of the American experiment. And like all people of goodwill and of deep thought, I'm as distressed as anyone at the turn in our own systems and the world in general. And we should all aspire to the words of that song. And most people know the chorus, very hootenanny style, but it's actually not. And if you listen to it and read the words, the original version, it's quite moving. And I think it really speaks to generation after generation that this land, you can expand it to mean this planet, it was made for all of us.
Thank you so much, Max. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, thank you, Nadine, and thank you to your associates and colleagues at Moment Magazine. I'm delighted to participate in this event, and I look forward to being with all of you in Washington, D.C.